or wants to learn more about Unity? Oh, right on. Cool. All right. This Unity presentation should be being streamed. You should be able to find it our Twitch, which is like SJSU
Game Dev.
This is being streamed at SJSU Game Dev. That's twitch.com/SJSU Twitch.tv.
So if it's a little
Twitch.tv. Don't go with the first one I said. That's a fast
Streaming officer, by the way.
Yeah.
So if you can't see the screen, just go to that stream and you can just see it on your computer. Easy peasy.
Otherwise, I advise to get closer. We don't bite. All right. So okay. All right. So why Unity? Well, it's free. You can run on most machines, and most of us here are using Unity. If you want to work on a group, work in a group with other people, Unity is probably your best chance because that's what probably everyone else has and uses. But we still encourage other engines. All right. So this is a little. First, we're going to go into the interface. Then we're going to show you how to use Unity. We're going to do a little bit of programming. We're going to program a timer, and you get to see how to make UI elements. And then we're going to show you kind of what to do after this tutorial, kind of help you advance your skills. And then we'll talk about making games in Unity. All right, the interface. So it's made up of the scene, hierarchy, inspector, and project tab. We'll get into that. So the scene, you can kind of think of it like you're a director, and you set up. You're directing a movie and you set up a scene, so you need to figure out what goes in your scene, what kind of props, who's acting, what kind of lighting you're having, your sounds. Basically, it's where you build your game.
Yeah, sure. So this little panel right here on the side, that's in that purple rectangle, that's the hierarchy. It's basically a list of every single thing that's in your scene. And you can organize things very easily. You can parent certain objects to other objects, and you can also rename them very easily. And it has a search function, so if you ever lose an object, you can do that.
Also, one thing I forgot to mention, who's actually running Unity right now? Okay, if you want to follow along with the tutorial, there's in the tutorial tab, there's the ball rolling.
Yeah, it's called Roll a Ball. It's in the tutorial section. You can download it. Asset Store, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's in the Asset Store.
You can do it in the installer.
Okay.
Okay. And all you have to do is delete the player ball if you want to follow along with the code. If not, it's okay. All right, the inspector. So in the inspector, this is where you decide to change the outfits of your actors. Literally, you have I don't know who popular actors are, but you can change their clothes, how they look, how they act, what kind of accent they have. The inspector allows you to really inspect your objects and change them.
Okay, and the project tab is like this prop drawer. It's where you have everything that's in your project is going to be in the project tab. So if you ever need to find some objects, some scripts, some sound effects, it's all always going to be in the project tab. So if you ever need any more content to add to your scene, you know where to go.
Mm-hmm. All right, so we're going to show you how to use Unity. So first we'll show you how to kind of create a game object, use the interface a little more, and we'll show you how to add a C# script.
So in the project that we're going to be doing, the Roll a Ball project, the player is going to be a ball that's going to roll around. So to do that, we're going to go to the Game Object tab at the top of the window, and we're going to make a new sphere. And we're going to rename it a player. You can rename it by right-clicking on it, doing rename. You can click and then click again. That's going to also let you do that. Or you can just press F2. So there's a lot of different ways to rename it.
Mm-hmm. So also one thing when you're creating an object is you always want to make sure its position values are set to 0 initially. So, and this is more like applies more to when you're parenting, which is a more like advanced thing, or you're importing object. You want to make sure that everything, the scale is set to 1, 1, rotation, and X, Y, Z values are set to 0 before you start moving at all.
Yeah, in this project, it's mostly so the ball doesn't fall through the floor. So we want to make sure that when you position the player, it's in a reasonable position, and 0, 0, 0 is going to do that. And if you're wondering how to do that, it's going to be the inspector at the top right of the screen. There's going to be that transform panel, and you want to make sure that those top 3 numbers are all set to 0.
So, player prefab. These are really helpful. It's like a helpful tool in Unity. It basically acts as a template for your objects. In this case, if you're familiar with web design, it's kind of like templates for pages. So you can make a page on a template, and it's kind of universal throughout the website. So in this case, when you make a player prefab, any changes you make to the object will change universally throughout the project, which is very helpful when you make like 5 mushroom monsters and you decide you want to make them bigger or scarier. Instead of editing each one, you can actually edit using a prefab. All you have to do to make a prefab is really just drag it down to the project tab, and that's just it. It becomes a prefab, and anything under will be listed that you can see.
And using the inspector, so we kind of brushed on this a little bit earlier on, but this is basically going to be your main way of editing the properties of objects. So you can change variables on the components for the object that we're going to get to in a little bit. And you can also customize the inspector with code, which is a much more advanced topic, but it's just something that you should know. That's not always going to look like that. If you ever get into more advanced coding in Unity, you can do a lot of cool stuff with it.
Alright, so in the inspector allows you to add components. This is kind of a cool part about the inspector. Instead of like, it takes a lot out of the programming you have to do in Unity. So in the inspector, you can add a component, and a component can be anything you really think of. It could be a script, it could be a collision box, or maybe some kind of sound it emits. So all you have to do, there's really just a button that just says add component, and you can search your opponent you want. In this case, we were adding a rig body 3D to the sphere, so it can collide with the floor, part of our project. And you can also just drag things into the inspector just to make it simple.
Don't forget about the player controller.
Oh yeah, we also. So if you want to, in our project we had a ball, and to control it, we needed to attach some kind of script to it that allows us to take input from the keyboard, and we just do that by adding a component. So you can make a script that logs all your WSD keys and sets the speed and acceleration, all that. You can write all that, and all you have to do is you add it to the inspector.
Yeah, so in the project that, if you're following along, it should just be called the player controller. So if you just press add component, go to the scripts page, or just search for player controller, that panel right there should end up attached to your player object. So after we add the component to the player, we do need to configure a couple of settings for it to actually make sense. So the most obvious one is speed. You probably want speed to be greater than 0. So that's going to let your WASD keys actually affect the player's movement. And also, this player controller, it keeps track of score and winning conditions. So to actually assign them, you're going to have to press those little circles that we've circled and pointed an arrow at. If you click on those, a little drop-down list should appear of different text objects that you can assign. So for the count text field, just choose count text. For the win text, just choose the one named win text. And then it should work after that.
It's just a really easy way, well, if you're really lazy, you just click the circle and it'll show you all the files in your project that will go into that section. And the cool thing about this is like speed, count text, and win text are variables you set in the code. And so instead of going into the code and changing variables, you can change the code using the inspector. So press play and yeah. All right, so we're gonna go through some programming and UI. It's really basic stuff.
So the first thing that you're gonna have to do for UI, if you're gonna make a timer, you're gonna need to make a timer object first. So if you go up to the Game Object tab at the top of the window, there's a UI category, and we want to grab that first item, text. This is just going to be your standard issue, just display text on screen object. And after you create that, you should rename it to timer, just so it's easier to organize. And UI elements in Unity, they're placed on screen according to three main things. Their position values, their pivot, and their anchor. So the position, that's pretty straightforward. It's just the pixel coordinates relative to something, and we're going to get to that in a little bit. The pivot is the center of the UI object, so by default it's going to be right down the middle in the X and Y, but you can change that. You can make it so it's centered according to the left side, according to the right side, anything like that. You can configure that with the pivot. And the anchor is what corner or edge of the screen the UI element is going to move with when the screen resizes. So let's say you attach this timer to the bottom left corner. If you start resizing your screen, it's going to move with that corner. And it's super important that you set up anchors, because if you don't, your game is going to end up looking really broken on different screen sizes. So don't forget about that. And for this timer, we're going to put it in the top right side of the screen, because this project already has some text in the top left. So to do that, we're going to go to the UI transform, which is called the rect transform. And that little square right there with the red lines and top right written on it, you want to click on that, and you want to choose from the list of possible anchors the top right corner of the screen. That's just going to attach the text object to that corner. And you also want to change the position. You can just drag it around in the scene if you want, or you could just use those numbers that are up on the screen right now. 0, -25, that's going to work. That's just going to position it where we want it to be.
Yeah, and again, the cool thing is this is all in the inspector. So it's, everything you need goes in the inspector. It gets all attached to the player. Really cool tool. It's really that's like the best thing about Unity. So we're.
Yeah, I'm just doing the whole thing.
Okay. So Unity uses C#. I think it also, any other coding languages?
Yeah, it also uses Unity script, which it calls JavaScript in the editor, but it's kind of like this weird hybrid of JavaScript and some other languages.
Yeah. So in this case, just like, so you just, in the project view, you right click and you'll make a C# script. And you can, once it's there, it's open, and you can open it up, and Visual Studio we're probably going to open.
Yeah, or mono behavior, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, I think it.
Mono develop, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think they might have canceled. They might have. Well, they don't use that anymore.
Yeah. So when we're actually coding the timer, we're going to have to start with knowing where we're going to actually display the time. So, and also just make sure that if you're following along, your screen looks something like this. When you open up the file, the C# file, it should say public last timer if you named it that. And it's going to automatically rename things whenever you make new C# files. So anyways, we're going to need a UI text object in the code for us to actually assign any text to. And that class is going to be in the unity.ui namespace. So up there at the top of the file, all those using fields, those are just namespaces that's going to let us get access to certain features of the engine. So to get UI features, we're going to use the using Unity engine.ui namespace. And once we have that class added to our file, we could just make a private text UI text. So that text class came from that namespace that we just added. And the name here doesn't really matter. It's just we want to have some kind of reference to that text object that we're going to be changing in code. Now, because it's private, by default, you can't see private fields in the inspector. So to make it visible so we can more easily edit it, we're going to put that serialized field tag right before it in the square braces. And that's going to let us edit it in the inspector while keeping it a private variable. And to actually change what text is going to be on screen, we're going to assign values to that .text field of the UI text object. We're going to be doing this in update, which is a named function that comes with Unity, and that's going to be something that's going to happen every frame of your game. It's going to usually be around 60 times a second. This is just going to let us update the timer as time passes in game. So we want to set a whole number to that field, so we're going to use mathf.roundToInt. Pretty self-explanatory. It's just going to round whatever number you send into it. And we also want to turn that into string because that's what the text field is going to accept. So just do uitext.text equals mathf.roundToInt.toString. And of course, we need something to actually round to an int. So we're going to get access to the current in-game time, and that's going to be time.time. Super self-explanatory. It's just going to give us the current game time as a float value.
And then all you need to do is add it to the inspector of the player. So this is how you link scripts to your player. Also, cool thing is maybe I don't want to just attach it to the player. I want to attach it to some other thing because I want to use timers for some reason. You can do that. This more applies to other code.
And also make sure that whenever you add this component to whatever you decide to add it to, for this to actually work, you're going to have to assign a UI text to the UI text field. So you can just drag and drop that, that timer text that we added a couple of minutes ago. Just drag and drop it into that UI text field. And now when you press play, the timer should start counting as time passes in game.
All right, so after this tutorial, you're probably wondering, how am I going to get better? And we're going to list a few things. So of course, practice is very important. Just like learning how to draw or learning how to skateboard, just keep using Unity and keep using it. And the more you get familiar with it, the better you'll get. The goal is to run into problems and errors and to not give up and fix them. I think like the hardest part of Unity, of starting out, is probably learning how to use the API for coding. There's a lot of methods that you need to use. And it's not to discourage you, but it's going to be a tough part to learn. So the Unity manual, you can access it through the engine or online. If you have a problem or some kind of issue, use the manual first before you look it up and try to find it. You'll be surprised what you'll find. Also, do game jams. You're probably wondering, well, I don't know how to use Unity. How am I going to make a game if I don't know how to use this tool? But again, game jams are for learning, and the best way to learn is to do it like within 40 hours of a due date. Which is probably what we do a lot in school when we procrastinate. A great place to go is itch.io. Probably a lot of you guys heard about it because you can publish games on there for free. If you look in the Game Jam tab, you'll see like there's a huge just calendar list of game jams. If 48 hours is too short and stressful for you, there's week-long ones, also month-long ones. Huge variety, all kinds of different challenges.
Yeah, sometimes there might be like upwards of 10 different game jams going at once. So if you don't like a theme, just look for a different one that's going on at the same time.
Yes. Also, I want to talk about a little about the asset store in Unity. If you guys haven't checked it out, there's a lot of cool just things you can buy.
A lot of free stuff too.
Also, a lot of free stuff. But I want to remind you, it's okay to make a game by yourself. I notice a lot of people sometimes they come in this club and they're like, I got this great idea. I need an artist, and and they're like, I haven't started yet, and I just want to tell you, it's okay. Just make that game anyways, because it just needs to. The game needs to show what you're good at. If you want to be a game artist, show that you can make game art assets for a game. If you want to be a game designer, show that you can make really cool levels. One cool thing is the ability to use Unity without coding. This is usually done through third-party assets that you can find at the asset store. There's some popular ones, they're like Bull. There's also Player Maker, and there's also a cool one called like MMORPG, which like allows you to just like make a MMO. It's just set up one. It sets it up for you. Does all the hard stuff for you. Just interesting things. Definitely Bolt will be pretty cool because it's visual programming, and especially if you're an artist and you don't know how to program and you're desperately trying to find a programmer, just learning how to use like some kind of visual scripting helps a lot because you can still, make the game mechanics that you want to do without getting into C#.
Yeah, and that screenshot right there, that's from an actually like released game by a professional studio that used Playmaker for most of its like functionality. Yeah. They didn't have to code that much just because the animators and artists could use that tool to make their creative process a lot easier. So it's not just for beginners. This is for like professionals who use this technology too.
Yeah, but in most cases, you're probably going to be using it for prototyping. Obviously, it's going to be a little limited compared to actual programming. There's also other assets that allow you to speed up your game process. If you guys are new, I also recommend Pro Builder. That asset allows you to like build levels. Kind of like 3D modeling. It's like some more enhanced 3D modeling tool in Unity. You can actually just like make 3D levels and stuff. It's super cool, especially if you're new and you're working with a group. There's also like other sound assets like sound or universal sound effects, which is like it's just a huge like asset full of like just useful sounds, just for prototyping and stuff. There's a Gaia or something like that, which just makes 3D terrain easier. But yeah, you're a Unity Pro, right? Yeah, no. So basically, you learned everything you need to know, really, how to get around Unity. Of course, you're still going to get stuck, and you're still going to be wondering why your code or game doesn't work. Again, practice, keep using Unity, stay in your groups, and work together. So, thank you. Is there any questions about Unity? I mean,
everyone following along, did you get to the finishing point that we got to? Did you get a running game? I hope so.
No, probably. But yeah, so
there's a question over there.
I guess it's less of a question, but I know for like a lot of people, like just like the look of Unity when like you open it up, it's like a little intimidating. Is it possible to like at least like show like a brief overview, like very basic, like directly like on the program, like where to find everything?
Yeah, that was kind of the first part about our. So basically, when you open up the Unity interface, it's really just these 4 things that you need to remember, which is the scene, the hierarchy, inspector, and project tab. The scene is where that's, when you see it, you instantly know, oh, this is where I build my game. That's like the window where you see.
Yeah, right in the middle.
View. There's the hierarchy, which allows you to organize your assets and find things.
It's the list of everything in your scene. It's going to be on the left side usually.
That'll be on the left side. And then there's the inspector, and that's different for each object you click on. So each object will have a different inspector because each object has different components, different codes, different sound effects, and there's a way to actually lock it if you're clicking around, if you want to keep the inspector, but mainly that's where you edit your objects. And then the bottom is the project tab, and that's kind of like your storage room. It's like your file browser for Unity. And you'll see the folders and stuff, and maybe the folders are confusing, but it's usually just, it's up to you how you want to organize your project. Kind of like organizing a project in File Explorer, or I don't know if you're using Mac, whatever they use. Yeah, does that make a little more sense?
Is it all the same typically for Unity 2D as well? Like
Yeah.
It's exactly the same. It's just the scene is going to look a little bit different. There's a 2D setting for it. And also if it's a 2D project, when you import images into the project, it's going to behave a little bit differently. But besides that, it's going to look exactly the same for a 2D project.
Okay. Alright, sorry, thank you.
Yeah. I mean, if you have any questions, you can ask us too. If you know how to get around Unity, like it looks intimidating at first, but once you like know how to how it all works, it's like, oh, you can figure out problems so much easier. So, if you need help with like programming and like more advanced Unity topics, Thomas is the guy. If you want to know more, if you're like new to 2D games and you want to make a 2D game, you can ask me, or maybe art assets. If you want to make more art assets, you can ask me about that too. And also Thomas, he has some experience. Yeah. So if you want to ask any more questions, just let us know. We'll be here.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks.